Something horrible has happened somewhere in my past. This Sigma thing is at the heart of it. I needed to stop Julius, but once this whole ordeal is over, this technology must be destroyed.
My mind is a perfect machine that turns games I dimly remember from my youth into YouTube videos with 10 likes.
Right.
Here I go again.
Let's go.
Today, turning an eager eye towards Impossible Creatures, the 2003 real-time strategy produced by now legendary Relic Entertainment, the company behind 3 major RTS franchises. Impossible Creatures never quite took off the same way, perhaps because the company was sold to THQ the year after it was published, or because the reception was a bit lukewarm. It's not a good sign that the main thing I remember about this game is how awesome the cover art was, and that I ended up buying it in a Staples office center for some reason. It also definitely suffers from coming out after Warcraft 3. I won't presume to say that's the best RTS ever, but it's easily my favorite for 1,000 reasons, and a game that entirely altered my expectations for the genre. Impossible Creatures, by comparison, feels impossibly dated just from being moments behind that huge swing in genre conventions. But more about that later. Let's start with the premise. We play as Rex Chance, a former wartime reporter, now exploring a chain of islands in search of the scientist father he's never met. The year is 1936. Everyone speaks in a vaguely transatlantic accent, and the world is very tongue-in-cheek.
Big beast up near our temple that's developed a real taste for sled dogs. And we're all out of sled dogs!
A sort of mashup of black and white B-movies, men's adventure pulps, and the island of Dr. Moreau. Immediately, Rex is ambushed by Upton Julius, a wealthy industrialist who releases horrible hybrid monsters after us. But we're narrowly saved by our father's assistant, Dr. Lucy Willing. Dr. Willing gives us a rundown of the Sigma technology used to make the turducken monsters, and provides us the ability to harvest the DNA of the local animals and combine them in our own Frankenstein beasts that we use to wage war against a series of oddball villain archetypes. It's a series of 15 missions spanning several island biomes, and each running about 20 minutes to an hour, depending on your skill and strategy. Mechanically, the game is built around one massive, awesome idea: the creature fusion. Throughout the campaign, we harvest animals from each map. Then we pick 2 animals we've harvested, choose which parts from those creatures will assert themselves, and create a horrible abomination to rip and rend our enemies to meager shreds of flesh. Or, more likely, we will create a very large lobster. The fusion system works fairly simply. Each animal we collect has a tier, innate traits, attack, defense, size, stamina, as well as modifiers such as regeneration, ranged attacks, and group bonuses. Traits are tied to specific body parts. For example, a goat's head provides horns for headbutting, but by using that head, you'll be missing out on the bite attack of whatever creature you're combining it with. And the different parts will affect the creature's total stats. A turtle torso provides a creature with excellent armor, but a lemming, not so much. Price also factors into this, with different limbs changing the total resource cost of each unit. You can only save 9 creature types at a time. However, the animals you collect carry over across each campaign mission, and in each mission you'll need to unlock a series of progressively expensive research tiers required to spawn the next tier of unit. It's a really bizarre and innovative system, but the rest of the game's mechanics fail to support the idea very well. Apart from the one big idea, the rest of the mechanics are uninspired. We've got a 50 unit cap and 2 resources: coal, which appears in patches of around 12,000 units each, and electricity, which we generate endlessly through buildings. There isn't a ton of differentiation between the resources. Almost every building, research, or unit will cost a comparable amount of both resources. There are upgrades to boost our electric generation and the speed and capacity of our workers as they mine. But there's no inbuilt mechanic to throttle progression or really limit the amount of top-tier units that we can use. Spawning a single creature of a given tier is variable cost, but seems to be around half as much as the research upgrade to reach the next tier. The first few missions are pretty fun as we're stuck fiddling around with low-level animals trying to figure out what works and how to suture a porcupine's ass onto a coyote. But by about the 5th mission, it becomes obvious that a handful of animals are wildly overpowered, while the vast majority are useless. Maps start out pre-populated with so many anti-air emplacements that the entire flying category of creatures is a cost sink. It's kind of an obvious thing to say, but the design of levels impacts how a player engages with them. The expected challenge informs the conscious or subconscious strategy. And in this world, the levels come pre-populated with loads of enemy towers everywhere that can one-shot your Tier 1 and 2 units. Essentially, whether it intends to or not, the game is forcing a particular strategy. Using your hero and a few low-level creatures to defend the base for 10 minutes while pumping resource upgrades, until we reach the tipping point of infinite production. And then it's the lobster hour. Lobsters are particularly imbalanced. They've got high armor, built-in regen, and the claws count as a unique 6th limb addition that doesn't overrule claws or bites. Once I unlocked lobsters and saw how stupidly powerful they are, I admit I kind of stopped experimenting. Oh well. To some degree, the game's abundance of choice in unit design leads to a lack of reasonable challenge in encounter design. Since they can't guarantee what units you're using, the enemy forces become very general and surmountable by almost any strategy. I think they could have controlled and directed the player's strategy better by only allowing you to combine the creatures you find on the specific mission. But it's about 20 years too late for constructive criticism. It's also lacking a lot of systems that similar games were already implementing by this point. There's no veterancy for units, regen isn't standard, there's no auto-activated abilities or way to put units into healing or repairing stances, no real interaction between the game world and your units. The maps are also static. They simply exist at a point in time, unchanging, without any sort of weather or day system. And there's no intriguing high-level wrinkles like terrain deformation that we see in later games from Relic. The actual real-time strategy of this game feels like an afterthought. Something they remembered they needed to add in to support the cool creature combining mechanic. For all the relative mechanical simplicity, Impossible Creatures is still pretty awesome. Maybe because it's imprinted into my childhood, but there's something delightfully campy and kitschy here that's just missing in today's sphere. There's no room for edginess, no room for brooding anti-heroes, but it's not turning and winking at the camera. It's lighthearted. It's a joke between friends that you're in on, here for a moment, remembered warmly, and forgotten until you see them again. As we progress, Rex gains increasingly concerning powers. Natural regeneration, a damage shield, a Sigma aura that improves nearby creatures' combat abilities, and it comes to a head when we're confronted by Dr. Ganglion, who reveals that Rex was the first Sigma, created during the Tunguska incident. It's exactly the sort of twist you'd see in the media that it's riffing on, and all the parts of the story come together very well. It's not exactly Moby Dick, but it's enjoyable in the same way most pulp stories are. Graphically, it's not that bad for the time, but you'll definitely notice how all the human characters' faces are stretched and bug-eyed. And since there are so many possible combinations of creatures, a lot of them have an uncanny stiffness to their limbs and are obviously not animated with much intention. The sound is also very competent. The main combat theme is a sort of safari-inspired drumming, like something you'd hear when Matt Helm is driving through the savannah.
The critters are under attack!
It makes some sense in the more tropical biomes, but it does feel weirdly out of place for the 3 Arctic levels. The henchman lines in this game could only be removed from my mind with an ice pick.
Henchmen under attack! Our base is under attack! The critters are under attack!
Overall, Impossible Creatures is an awesome, imaginative core wrapped in bland, dated RTS mechanics. It's not the most challenging game, although it does have a few difficulty spikes here and there, and its biggest failure is in the creature balancing, the obvious choices, and surprising lack of tactical options. On the pain scale, I would rate Impossible Creatures as moderately painful. The creature combining is genuinely brilliant, but the back half of the game feels underdeveloped and hollow. I remember liking it a lot more when I was a kid, but, well, tastes change, genres evolve, and expectations shift like sand. Well, that's all for my 34th review. By my count, I now have 234 games remaining in my backlog. I'm almost certain that's more than I had before I started making these videos. But it's a good problem to have. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, see ya!